to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. This is a little bit of a special episode. Lucas and I are going to try to battle this one out today on our own without Song's guest star. And that is because we are getting towards the end of the year. Admittedly, we have been through a very busy season on both of our parts. And so episodes have been a tad scattered. So apologies out there to everybody, period, for that. But we really realized that there's a lot of things happening in the market right now across the board that maybe it was we were due to pause for a moment and have a one-on-one discussion around what you are seeing in the market, Lucas, and what your feel for it is. I mean, we love talking to all of our experts that come on the show, but at the end of the day, you're also an expert. I'm just here, as a side gig here with the cane, pulling everyone in and getting everyone to behave on the show. But you have a lot of great insights. Okay, I asked good questions.
We volley these things around before the episodes often, and you come up with some of the greatest ideas here as well. Wow. So this is a two-way street.
Thank you. So we are, I think you were just saying in the preamble here before we captured, for a little insider sauce for you guys to know, we often do feel like we start going into all the great meat before we actually start recording. So I was like, Lucas, we got to stop. We got to start recording. Let's get all the good stuff.
That's it. It happens with our guests also. I mean,
it does.
We usually get 5 minutes in and go, or 10 minutes in, 20 minutes in and go, did we record that? Because we really should have.
Right. That was a great, I love the way you just said that. Remember that. So we're going to dive in. This is I think, what did you call it before we started to come on the air? Erin and
This
Lucas.
is sort of the Lucas and Erin shoot the shit episode.
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit pardon the language, but yeah, we started talking about, what's really relevant topics in and around associations. And you had mentioned we, come from pandemic and now we're looking through ahead towards, recession, inflation. Well, inflation is here. What type of recession is coming? How large? We talked about succession planning within the association market and polycentric leadership. And we started talking about all sorts of things. So
yeah, we're all over the board. So let me just, maybe I'll just set it up from my perspective. As I always like to say, I'm like the non-resident association person, but I sit on the other side. I sit on the side of sort of commerce. So really the area where we are the members, if you will, of the associations that a lot of your clients are managing. And these members out there, regardless of which industry they're in right now, are facing headwinds. Mm-hmm. Randomly, there are a few industries that are facing tailwinds, which is making everyone's head spin because no one can quite understand what is happening right now. I spent a lot of my time in the automotive business, and man, talk about an industry that's just very complex, very dynamic, and being flipped all around based on supply chain issues and consumer demand and things like this. And so these are the issues that, make their way back into these professional associations, these industry associations. And then you're the guy on the other end saying, hey, how do I help the industry of associations navigate what their members are going through and navigate creating value and navigate what their own organizations and businesses look like, because they're facing a lot of the times very similar challenges. We just tend to believe that associations sort of sit in this little random world over here, this nonprofit world or this, NGO world where maybe the same, business philosophies don't apply, and yet they do. So I'm just curious, given what you're hearing in the market for the member landscape around the economy and the inflation and the impending potential recession, and also the dropping of the pandemic language, Lucas, what are you hearing out there on the ground with a lot of your clients?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. Recessions bring, on one hand, the greatest opportunity for associations because they lean on their lifeblood, right? Government affairs. Like this is the time where members are looking to associations to lobby on their behalf, help their industry, make sure that we don't collapse specifically around everything else. And there are industries that will do very well through leadership at associations who are lobbying hard to, protect those rights and putting things from through Congress that help them or that are spotlighting, hey, during hard times, here's tax credits or things that we've negotiated, things that are already out there. You're sort of the source of truth, both on promoting and saving from a government perspective. And on the flip side, it's a difficult time because they're all having these conversations of, what should we expect, right? Let's not be naive. Like if a recession comes, we're going to lose members. Is that 5%? Is that 20%? I think that varies again based on your industry, how well you've sort of prepared from a leadership perspective for this type of thing. I mean, these conversations really needed to start 8, 12 months ago, right? That's where, I mean, pandemic is behind us, so to speak, and it's now looking ahead. And don't get caught sort of with your proverbial pants down here in March of next year, having not done anything, because at that point you're too late. And at that point, you're trying to, regroup your event in 2021. Like, okay, well, you missed it.
We're not facing the issue of people not being willing to show up for live events. We're facing the issue of, are people now going back to trimming the fat on T&E expenses and sending individuals to these events? And you mentioned the government affairs. I didn't even mention midterm elections, which this year is quite, it could be really swinging one way or another, depending on what happens in these states. It's a real battle this year. It's a really interesting midterm election. So
there's a lot of things up in the air all at once, 100%.
Yeah. And so are you seeing that there's any one area that your clients are sort of digging into for the long haul? So is it member retention? Is it, what do they do with their sponsorships and events and things like this? Is it, how do they make sure they get the proper visibility for the work that they're doing in government affairs? Like, is there one area where they're really batten down the hatches, or is it, does it feel very polymorphous to you?
That's a good question. During the pandemic, we had a lot of activity with our clients that wanted to talk about member value. It was sort of a scramble back, reactive. Hey, what do we need to do to capture our members? Now we're having, because of inflation, for example, we're having a lot of conversations on how should I restructure my dues up, right? Before it was, hey, member value, member value. Now it's, hey, we're experiencing rising costs just as everybody else. Everything costs more right now. And now is the time really to be thinking about raising the dues. But now the question they want to understand better is by how much, right? What is the market really bearing in terms of a dues increase? Is it 5%, 10%, 30% in some cases?
Right.
And while, this weird juxtaposition between not wanting to scare your members away, but needing to keep pace and understanding that it's expected. Like there's an expectation that your bread's going to cost more, your fuel's going to cost more. Why shouldn't your membership? And if you've spent time on your value statement and your mission, you should be confident in that, right? You should be confident in raising your dues by an amount that is representative of the work that you've been putting in. I recently talked to one of our clients who had not, as an association, hadn't raised their dues in 10 years. And I just about fell out of my lunch chair. I was like, why not? And I think, again, some of it is trepidation around not wanting to lose members. And I think that's kind of a poor excuse. And the other is maybe not just focusing on that. Everybody wants to broaden the spectrum of non-dues revenue and diversify. It's 100% strategy that should be implemented and has been. Most associations have done a good job on that, but don't forget about the dues, right? I mean, Netflix raises their subscription rates, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and do you see, because you work a lot on like member benefit programs, affiliate marketing, things like this. So I'm just curious, coming from a perspective of, there are some industries. So, we expect our cars to cost more. We expect our electronics to cost more because it's pretty evident that supplies, materials are going up in cost. We expect our groceries to cost more. Do you find that a lot of associations perhaps need the coaching around, let's call it marketing or verbalizing the benefit of their member benefits, because some of the value that they produce is intrinsic. It's as a result of what they offer the industry as a whole. You're not going to an association to buy XYZ product, which you expect. Yep, that's probably went up by 15% because shipping costs have gone up and supply. There's like it's a service-based industry, and I would assume most service-based industries are having a little, outside of saying talent is costing me more. There might be some challenges around what exactly is the level of threshold that's pushing the costs up for an association staff, for an association organization, which is where, the member benefits and the negotiation of those types of affiliate partners is becoming an education. We talked a lot about that with a lot of different groups, things like that. So I'm just curious if you've seen like it's a messaging problem more than it is an actual value creation problem.
100%. I mean, historically, again, the need or the drive for affinity programs, let's call them member benefit programs, some of them were just, again, it was revenue focused. How can we diversify our revenue streams as an organization? And there
Right.
hasn't been as much emphasis on, well, how much value are we really adding? And so
Right.
working in our way towards this upcoming, or maybe we're already half a step into a recession, who knows? This becomes a really powerful message that if you can actually save. And so as within core affinity, for example, we see an uptick, at least looking historically on affinity, but you see an uptick because people are now looking for areas of opportunity to save. Like if all of my bills are going to go up and potentially my revenue stabilizes or even takes a dip, I need to save some money anywhere I can.
Right.
And so staffing's difficult, right? Because those costs are going up, and
Right.
maybe a little bit of an impending bubble on the unemployment rate, maybe, knock on wood.
Yeah.
But the other piece of it is my indirect costs and all of these things that the association can curate and leverage buying power on their behalf. The savings become a really important aspect of that. And so, yes, reframing the value of those programs to the member. And
Right.
some do this really, really well. The ones that push out saving statements and that talk about that, and at the time of renewal, I'll actually put up in paper form, hey, here's how much you saved last year. By the way, here's your.
Right.
And in some cases, there's a big discrepancy, meaning in their favor. We saved you
Right.
$40,000 last year, and your dues are $10,000. Time to
Right.
renew, and so that helps one soften the blow for the member to renew, and reinforces the value that the association's brought during that period. And that is, it's already there. To your point, Erin, it's just messaging and communicating
Right.
and
Yeah.
changing about what is the driver for, or the impetus for even having these programs, assuming you have the staff or the mindset to put that
Partner.
together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Actually, I hadn't really thought about the dichotomy of an organization saying we want to bring in affinity partnerships as part of our member benefits. Mainly to your point, in the past, it's been a non-dues, you know, revenue generating type of activity for the organization. And while it was certainly sold as a member benefit, the primary concern of the organization might have been a non-dues revenue resource. But to your point, being able to say it's both and, right? It is a non-dues revenue source for you, but it is also a real value creation for your members. And it's important that you message that to your members so that they see the whole of the benefits that the organization is bringing them, not just maybe the CEIs that you can get through the education programs, the government affairs and lobbying that you can get through that, but also this real member value, especially in a time when people are looking at their budgets and trying to figure out where can they save and where can they put money in. And you mentioned talent. I know I want to pick up on the polycentric leadership conversation for a second here as well, but I'm curious that in a market where talent is also really strange, like we're in a really weird employment place right now, and salaries are an issue, a challenge. Companies are really wrestling with hybrid, not hybrid workplaces. Employees coming, maybe even fresh out of college saying I'm worth six figures and things like that. I mean, like where is a real run on how to afford talent. I'm curious if you've heard from or spoken with any of your organizations, your industry partners around not only their ability to help their members work on training, skilling up, these types of things for their industry, but also for the associations themselves to find employees or retain employees in this environment. Is that a subject of conversation? And have you guys given any thought to how what you all offer can help them think about that?
Yeah. So for starting with the organization itself, the conversation comes up, I would say almost weekly.
Yeah.
The idea that, associations intrinsically, the bulk of their expense, when you look at their 990s, are their staff, right? And so
Yeah.
take that and consider that, recently Social Security had an increase that was approved that was over 8%. And so what am I supposed to do as an association leader? Am I supposed to increase my staff expense by 8+%?
Right.
Like, that's a big number, and that's really hard
Yeah.
to swallow. That can be a budget buster for a lot of associations, small or large staff.
Right.
It's all proportional. So the impact is the same. 8% is a big number. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to find ways to, like, I want to do something, but I can't reach 8%. Like, I'd have to pull back on other budgetary things that would negatively impact the vision that I've cast for
Right.
this association or group over the next 3 to 5 years. That doesn't fit in my model, so to speak.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's how else can we create incentives? Are we going to permanently work from home now because that's become a benefit that people are going to lean
Right.
into more often? Am I going to change the hours? Am I going to be more flexible? I got to move benefits
Right.
around. Like, yeah, there's a whole set of puzzle pieces on the table just around their internal staffing. And
Yeah.
then when you flip to the member side, yeah, am I somebody that has a job board for my industry? But more than anything, like, am I somebody who's created a community for my association
Right.
that adds a ton of value in that perspective, so that people can network with other leaders from the organization, the member organization, to understand, hey, what are others doing? Because the sharing of
Yep.
ideas, I wholeheartedly believe this, I would say, record-setting attendance right now that we're experiencing at the
Yeah.
live events is 100% for that. Well, okay, maybe
Yeah.
90% for that. There's 10%
Yeah.
that people just want to crawl out of their home office cave
Right.
and be
Right.
around people. But the other
Yeah.
90% is, I need to understand and network with people in my industry to understand, what are you doing about staffing? What are you doing about costs?
Right.
Besides, can we network and be partners and potentially aggregate and merge and do all
Yeah.
those things? So
That's
creating,
huge.
from an association perspective, creating a community has become the number one opportunity for value. And if you haven't done it, you need to get on board, like, right now.
Yeah.
And it would also feeds into another conversation, similar but unrelated, is brand. And this conversation really well, is brand has become the thing, right? So even influencers online and everywhere else, it's finally, shocker, become obvious that brand is real power, and
Right.
people that can influence others, you're following a brand.
Right.
Even when the brand is a person, you're actually following the brand.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you think about all those influencers, like the association creating a community to help
Right.
build its own brand, to help create ultimately the value. And that will
Yeah.
lead to not only increase number of members, your ability to increase your dues, but the relative consumption of all of the other affinity and member benefit programs, your events and everything else will scale with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So transitioning over to this polycentric leadership conversation,
Yeah.
you'll have to explain to me what polycentric leadership means, the meaning of it. But I will say, as a solidly born in the lowest birth rate year of our Gen Xers, our dear Gen Xers, who finally are going to get their day in court, we are reaching a unique and interesting crescendo in generations. So we've got the bottom of the baby boomers finally being the last of their group that's retiring. They're finally, baby boomers were a huge generation and enormous numbers and so on and so forth. But we now, I think the bottom of the baby boomer, the last year of the baby boomer right now would be about 58 years old, because I think it switched in 1964.
Right.
And so, and then we start Gen X, the forgotten generation. I think you're a millennial, maybe, I can't remember. Maybe you're in that crossover section. So I'm gonna watch my words here. But a lot of associations have been, a lot of organizations, period, have been very focused on how do we market to the Gen Y or millennials, Gen Zs, and like really focusing on the young generation, and like, ooh, the baby boomers were a huge population forever. And now we're getting to this really weird spot where succession planning is coming into play. We've got a lot of folks at the bottom of the baby boomers now officially exiting if they haven't already, because frankly,
Right.
that generation, that tail end of that generation during the pandemic were some of the most adversely affected, or at least were the ones who were like, sign me up for early retirement. Let me just go ahead and get out of here if that's what you
Yeah.
need. And now you've got the top end of Gen X getting to real leadership level. And admittedly, it's the generation a lot of people haven't focused a tremendous amount of energy on. And so succession planning is now like a really strange thing. And it's going to be probably malleable for the next 5 to 10 years because of that generational shift. And I'm curious, first, will you explain to us what polycentric leadership means? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about what you've been hearing about ways in which to deal with it.
Sure. So we'll come back to polycentric in a second. I
Okay.
think the baby boomer issue is real, and
Yeah.
many have understood the impact, and maybe some haven't. But this early exodus, I would call it, caused by the pandemic of the baby boomers, in large part creates the gap in the labor market because suddenly they're gone, and now we're the boats are the boats are coming up that we're underneath, and everyone's rising into these new leadership positions. And the ones that were prepared for that and could see the foresight that this was going to happen eventually, maybe had to accelerate their plans a bit, by a few years, but they put in place a model of succession appropriately, and they've done it the way that maybe we've always done it. Maybe they came up with something new. I think this idea of polycentric leadership or management is not necessarily new to the association world, but this idea that there's multiple insights and influence into not only the direction, but the decision making day to day in some cases, so that it's not this traditional, buck stops with me, buck stops here type of model. But also because there's so many more people at the table, so to speak, and making decisions, some cases in specific areas. So there could be a leader in this, in just government affairs. There could be a CEO type leader that's just in sort of events. All of those individuals having a seat at the table and obviously collaborating. But there isn't just sort of one king hanging at the top or queen hanging at the top that makes all the decisions all the way throughout. And so in the association world, we have a board of directors, we have executive committees, we have leadership influence from member committees. In some cases, these are thousands of individuals, which I just always laugh at, those associations.
Oh my gosh, really?
1,000 people on their board. And I'm like, okay, this has gotten a little out of hand, but I digress. But the idea that this type of leadership can help mitigate the risk of one person sort of either being hit by the bus or not being planned for the next, right? Everybody can be replaced, which is true. Every seat on the bus can be swapped out for somebody. And how that pairs with succession planning, we talked about before the show, is when you get into a new role, like succession planning, at least the thought of could begin then, right? So a new CEO that comes into an association role, why not start thinking about the succession planning then versus having them run the steamship for 30 years and then, oh, by the way, just being gone a moment later. You could be grooming younger talent, and the advantage of that would be you're able to impart whatever wisdom that current leader has, and at the same time leave room for influence and understanding of a younger generation. Like I had shared before, this idea, I'm still wrestling with this, right? I'm maybe a little bit antiquated here in the sense that, like, I think there should be one person who has like the final say, or the buck stops with them. But maybe I'm an old fuddy-duddy now all of a sudden that, like, this is a better way of doing it, and this type of model paradigm would be a better fit for future generations, knowing what we know of how millennials or younger generations are going to tend to respond.
Well, and I think you and I were talking about this leading up to it. Certainly there have been plenty of organizations that have co-CEOs that have The chairmen of the boards play a really active role, especially, like Starbucks, I think is just about to go through this where Howard Schultz once again is stepping aside. I think this
Yeah.
is his third time.
Yep.
But he's going to stay engaged. I think this idea where you might identify talent sooner so that your runway might be 3, 5, 10 years, something like that. I mean, on one side, you wonder the longevity of careers. How often are people really staying with organizations that long anymore? And if you can't guarantee that the top role is theirs at the end of that 3, 5, 7 year, cycle, would the younger generation be willing to stick around under that tutelage, if you will? Or is that actually what we've been missing, is this sort of program to bring leaders in at a stage where you can entice them and incentivize them to learn and stay with the organization for an expectation that they would then be getting that top role, and therefore experience less turnover or less chaos when someone is automatically retiring. And I certainly think we could all say that back in the pandemic, that certainly did happen just by sheer force and numbers of how many individuals were affected at certain age groups, from the actual virus, did put a lot of people under pressure or leaving the industry, period. So I'm curious as to how associations will deal with this in developing their own succession planning programs that might incorporate a little bit more of this thinking. And then what might they be thinking about, again, is value creation for their members in offering programming around this, that this is a real thing, that generationally we are experiencing another turnover of a big set of generational changes. And how does that impact businesses across the organization's industry?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was what came to mind was two specific areas within the association model that I think should be elevated to somebody having more influence at the top, and that was marketing and technology. Like those two areas have changed so rapidly in the past, even 10 years. Like how we communicate with people today is almost unfathomable to somebody who was in their seat as a CEO 20 or 30 years ago, assuming that person hasn't kept up with the technology that is creating that engagement. And if you have not, which is not necessarily an expectation of a CEO, I wouldn't say, because you need to have somebody who can do that. You can't do that and lead the organization. It's too fast. There's too much. I certainly can't keep up with the technology, but thankfully we have folks that can, and around us that do, and that are experts. And those people just, I think, need to have a bigger seat at the table and understand, because that is what will drive the ultimate influence 10 or 15 years from now to the association. If you don't understand what's happening within technology and marketing, you're going to be left behind in very short term.
And I would think that that's actually something, if we were to advise the association industry to be thinking about, is that education and certification of your industry's individuals and members has certainly been a big strength of trade association organizations. Again, member benefits, affinity programs, these things are all things that I think industry associations have a real specific role and a real specific value creation spot in the market with their members. But I do think that more and more, especially with the rapidity of like technology, marketing, and everything else changing, that thought leadership, I think that's our thought leadership across every industry has become very popular over the last few years. I think TED Talks certainly kicked off that entire just generation of thought leadership being a thing, and a public intellectual being an actual title that someone can hold. But more to come, exactly. But I do think that there is a real value in that, is that if associations can find themselves in a spot of being able to better delineate and crystallize, hey, here are the changes that are coming in our industry, and here's how we can help you identify those changes, deal with the changes in a quick manner, how we can train up your employees for those very specific areas that are going to continue to transition at such a fast pace. And I would argue in a lot of associations or industries, that, and I've been talking about this a lot with a lot of my automotive colleagues, is a lot of industries, especially automotive, home buying, these types of industries, where especially when they're like big purchases, they're going to have to do both things well for a long time. Like they're,
Yeah.
you know, I'll use the automotive industry as an example. Electrification is not coming tomorrow. It's here. Yes. Okay. We got 3% of the market buying them now. Like we are on the move.
Right.
Electrification is going to find its way into, you know, the powertrains that we decide on in the future.
It's
But
happening.
ICEs are going to be here for a long time. So people in the automotive industry have to be able to ride both of those parallel tracks for the foreseeable future. And when I say for foreseeable future, I think honestly 10 years or so, if not longer. Like they
Yeah.
have to be doing well at both. And same thing with digital transformation, you know, being able to sell things online, e-commerce, and sell things in store live, IRL. Those things are going to have to be on parallel tracks for at least the next 10 years and 15, and not on parallel tracks like, oh, you got to you have to be doing both really well for the next 10 to
Right.
15 years, because I think your audience is going to continue to stay split. I would imagine associations have felt that when it comes to events, these mass, like, okay, everyone had to your point, 100% attendance. Everyone's like, whoa, everyone's back in person. That will even back out again, right? And they
Sure.
will have to figure out a way. How do we continue to do that equally well in both areas? How do we equally run a staff that wants to work in the office and a staff that wants to be remote? How do we equally work, you know, teams that still want to use high technology and low technology to, you know, really disseminate member benefits? And so I think you're at a real, you know, especially Core Affinity and the Big Red M and other organizations that you're, you know, in charge of and responsible for, are in a real unique position to help organizations solve that dichotomy of needing to be really good at both. And I think we're in a really unique space. Again, I'm really always, you know, being a recovering marketer, the generations always really interest me. And I remember a couple of years ago, again, being the angry Gen Xer, when I was like, why do we care so much about millennials? They're like 20, they can't afford anything yet, you know. But we're now in the point where millennials are mid-career, you know, and Xers are getting to the post, you know, top of their career and the real income earning years and things like that. Like that's all really interesting, because Gen
Yeah.
Xers also hold a lot of that previous, you're saying you're an old fuddy-duddy, you know, you're not. You're just in a generational gap that like still does find that to be valuable. And so I think it will, I think honestly the next couple of years are going to really reveal that we are not in a revolution, we're in an evolution. And people want to believe it's a revolution because some things have changed so drastically. But I find, at least if I'm Nostradamus here on our little shooting the shit conversation, my prognostication is we're going to have to we're evolving slowly, and we're going to do, you know, we're really lucky to have a pretty advanced track over here, but we're going to have to keep this track going for quite some time.
Yeah.
And we're going to need people to be equally good at both.
There's definitely some things that are cyclical and certainly, you know, you see it in fashion. I always chuckle at the things that have now come back and we're like, well, it's not new. And
how do we not kill that trend?
Our parents said the same thing, right? And when
Right.
we were bringing those things back as young folk. But to your point, yeah, there's some things that aren't going to come back, and that's okay. To evolve is, you know, is a good thing. And so, yeah, I think to your point also, there has been a little peak in the attendance for live events, but that will settle. And you know, you mentioned the affinity programs and all these other things that the associations offer. Those are the products, if you will, but you can't sell, if that's even the right word, you can't sell your products unless you have built this community, you have members who are engaged, and engagement is meaning something different every day. Remember, like roll back the clock and you know, engagement was the buzzword 10 years ago. But even what engagement means and how do you get it has just advanced so quickly or changed. To advance engagement methods is not necessarily right, but it's changed and it will continue to change. And if we don't recognize what's going on in the younger generations and use that, it's just, you never be able to sell your products. Like you won't get out. You may start to plateau, and then over time, you know, when you really zoom out, you could sort of see this trend already coming.
Well, and I mean, what's the famous saying? I know I'm going to totally butcher who said it, but history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, right? So we're going to keep hearing some rhyming rhyming in our future, which is good, which is great. Both of those things offer a lot of opportunity for you to explore. I know that just having worked with your organization in the last couple of years, just the new technology you guys have adapted and adopted and tried to proliferate throughout the organizations, and the new ways of thinking about affinity marketing partnerships and ways in which you can help organizations grow. I know that certainly during the pandemic, we talked to a lot of guys on this podcast, guys and gals, around sponsorship sales and building better, marketability around what events are when they all got erased, and then what do we do when they all came back, and now that's going to go through its own evolution, as we just said. And so I don't know, I think you've got a really fun road ahead of you. Any final thoughts on some things you're excited about moving into 2023 as like big things that you might be working on that are new, or just a topic that you're excited to start exploring more?
I mean, we have a lot of great conversations with clients, current clients, prospects, and we hope to be there sort of in stride and in partnership with them going into next year. I think the vast majority of our clients are really well positioned, and every new opportunity, every new conversation we have, I get excited about, because it's kind of like a new problem to solve. I like big, complicated problems, for better or worse. I try not to make them up just so I can solve them, but I sometimes do. So I'm excited to just walk with our current clients now in partnership and help them be successful during that time. I'm excited about meeting new clients. We do have some things on the short-term horizon, which I can't share yet, but will be exciting in the months to come as our family of companies expand and grow and change and evolve. So more to come on that. Maybe we'll do a whole episode just on that and talk about, what's next in 2023 within our ecosphere, if you will. But I think there's lots to be excited about. And as long as you keep current and looking forward, recessions are cyclical just as anything else. And if we can say that history is the greatest predictor of the future, recessions end, even if they do come.
We'll get through this.
And there's opportunities at every stage.
Yep. I agree with you. Well, a big thank you to you for giving me some time to just pick your brain on some of these topics. A big thank you to one of our last guests, Jeffrey Tenenbaum. I just want to put this out there because he was great to give us just a wealth of names to pick from and talk to, all CEOs of some really great organizations. And so to all of you out there who remain nameless, because we've got you on a list, we're coming for you. We're hoping that we can build out a little series here where we can kind of get some thoughts on a lot of these topics from some CEOs of major organizations moving forward in the next few weeks. But as we wrap up 2022, we just wanted to make sure, I wanted to make sure that I got a little conversation with you and give an insight to our listeners and our audience on what are you thinking about, what we might be exploring in the coming year in these shows.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Erin. I really enjoy this. I mean, we should probably think about weaving this in at least once a quarter and just coming on here and doing the shoot the shit episode. Maybe we'll call it that unofficially. But, this is good and gives us a chance to stop and reflect, but also look forward and hopefully share some things that our audience can take away. And obviously they know where to find us if they're interested, and open to have conversations anytime.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I will give a quick shout out, quick fun story I'll end on here as I pull my own proverbial cane to get me off the stage. So as most people know, I won't name the name of the person, as I'm not sure I should, of who officially helped us come up with the name for the show, 6 Degrees of Associations. But what I think has been really fascinating is how much you've even noticed over the years, because we've now been doing this for years. This 6 degrees, of Kevin Bacon, is where this came from, or where that concept comes from, and how many times you have had a guest on the show where you're like, oh my gosh, Erin, I actually was so well connected to that person. I can't believe I never crossed paths with them before, but now I'm connected, and now there's like 2 degrees or 1 degree. So fun story. I actually now have 1 degree of association to Kevin Bacon. I was in Austin. I was in Austin in September, and I worked out next to one Mr. Kevin Bacon. And I know, I regret it. I didn't know it was him. I worked out with him in a gym of a hotel in Austin, and it was a very tiny gym. And afterwards, someone said, "Did you know you were working out next to Kevin Bacon the whole time?" I was like, "I sure did not." And now
Oh,
I'm so disappointed that I didn't get to say, "Hey, dude, 1 degree of separation from Kevin Bacon for me, finally."
wow.
Yeah. So I
What an
love the
interesting
fact that
guess.
I know, right? Hey, Kevin, we have a show that's somewhat named after you. Would love to have you on. He's a great guy. Just listened to a great interview with him, but just fun. I've really enjoyed getting to see the degrees of associations that you carry in this industry and how short that gap has gone from 6 degrees to 3 degrees to 1 degree. And I hope the rest of our audience has really been able to reap the same benefit of going, oh wow, like connecting the dots. That's great that he knows this person. And I love the idea that we asked the person, that wasn't my idea. So I'm saying I love it because I'm not taking credit for it, of, hey, do you have someone you'd recommend to us? So just for all of those listening out there, if you've been on our show before and you already gave us one guest, but you're thinking, oh, I've got someone new that I love you guys to talk to. That's the whole point of this. Again, I know Lucas has said it multiple times, but the point is to really make sure that those in the industry are connecting and are knowing about each other. This is a place, this is building a community from your resources and your brain and your heart there, Lucas. And I hope that people will take it seriously, that we are always open for those recommendations. Those referrals don't need to come just at the end of your episode. And we are excited to start working up some more episodes again with some referrals and get back on track. So thanks to everyone
Well,
who's
I
always
always
participated.
appreciate when I'm able to make a new connection, but
Yeah.
ideally, I hope that others are making I know of some. I know somebody, some people that have reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've been able to meet so and so. I didn't know this person in the industry. I've now made a great connection, and we're doing business together,
Good.
and it's good for both." And I'm hopeful that there's 5 times as many connections being made that we don't hear about,
Yep.
that will continue. And I know, shout out to Jay Daughtry, who recently emailed me and
Yeah.
said, "Hey, I'd love to connect you with some more people. I'd love the show." And so we'll circle back with Jay here soon. And he just wants to get the word out and hear
Yeah.
from more leaders in the industry and about what's working, their challenges, and how they're overcoming things, or what they do for the industry and how they're helping associations. So
Yeah. No,
that I
I
also
love
look
that.
forward to.
Yeah, that's great. And I did forget about Jay, and I know that we're going to be talking to him soon for his other connections. So yes, thank you, Jay, for coming back around to us. And this is an open invitation to all of those who have appeared on the show before. Please do refer us to new folks, and feel free if Lucas and I are going to go ahead and gather this up once a quarter. Send us some questions that you'd like us to ask and answer in future sessions. And I think I'll, with that, wrap it up. So thank you so much, Lucas, for being here today.